writing The Role of Civil Obedience in Democracy, Kayla Starr outlines the essential definition of civil disobedience. She states, "Civil disobedience is the act of disobeying a law on grounds of moral or political principle. It is an attempt to influence society to accept a dissenting point of view. Although it usually uses tactics of nonviolence, it is more than mere passive resistance, since it often takes active forms such as illegal street demonstrations or peaceful occupation of premises." The classic treatise on this topic is Henry David Thoreau's On the Duty of Civil Disobedience, which states that when a person's conscience and the laws clash, that person must follow his or her conscience. The stress on personal conscience and on the need to act now rather than wait for legal change are reoccurring elements in civil disobedience movements. The U.S. Bill of Rights asserts that the authority of government is derived from the consent of the governed, and whenever any form of government becomes destructive, it is the right and duty of the people to alter or abolish it. So Starr relates that it is in the conflict between law and conscious morality that we as citizens must act to eradicate what she names the destructive force of government. For Starr, there are four main reasons why people act out in forms of non-cooperative civil disobedience. 1. They act out of a sense of moral conviction. To not act would be to ignore one's own moral obligation. 2. To increase equality and to allow potential for collective bargaining. 3. To extend a potential of action, interrupt business as usual in order to be heard. Or 4. To demonstrate that the system they are against is part of the problem. Gandhi, whose own act of civil disobedience against British colonial rule, stated that non-cooperation with evil is as much a duty as cooperation with good. For Starr, civil disobedience offers the possibility of social change because it embodies how laws can act in opposition to both moral and just ideals of society. Civil responsibility becomes about creating space for laws and civil liberties that are ineffective and ethically wrong to be changed. So how does civil disobedience create social change? What exactly does that look like? For me, it does not always culminate in a protest or a sit-in. Jesus himself was not obedient to the civilities which allowed the poor and the disinherited in society to be crushed. In fact, when he walked into the temple, he did not simply stand by and watch as the poor were crushed by overcharging on sacrificial animals. He himself called out the problems that were occurring. Eugene Cho writes about Nehemiah's confrontation with his own community when he goes to restore the walls of Jerusalem. He is blocked and criticized, and still he works towards a moral call or vision on his life. Cho, in regards to Nehemiah, writes, "This wasn't just a show, an event, a conference, a gathering, a public broadcast. For Nehemiah, this was an ongoing series of acts of submission, trust, and desperation as he prayed to God. He wanted his acts and motivations coming from the heart of God." In these examples, we see that there is a sacrifice to civil disobedience. There is critique, ridicule, and isolation. But the call of civil disobedience is not a comforting pat on the back for a job well done. It is knowing that there is wrong and working towards a space of righting those wrongs. Lewis Perry writes about the act of civil disobedience being central to the very foundation of the American Republic. He writes, "It would be easy to compile a long list of books and articles linking together references to the Boston Tea Party, the suffragette movement, the resistance to British rule in India led by Gandhi, the U.S. civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King Jr., student sit-ins against the Vietnam War, are instances where civil disobedience served as an important mechanism for broad social change. All these instances have brought significant change. America's freedom from colonization, the right for women to vote, civil rights being extended to all, are but a few massive social changes that are created from the acts of civil disobedience. However, civil disobedience does not come without a cost. As Robert Sassine puts it, to qualify as civil disobedience, unlawful political actions must profess a higher obedience, intend neither to open violence nor secret subversion, and accept punishment which is truly legal. There is often a huge price to pay for actions of disobedience, but it is often when this is done sacrificially that imperative social change can occur. Perhaps this willingness to sacrifice, to give of oneself, is also important in social change. because as we ask for change, we too are changed. So for the last section, I'm just going to go through a couple of examples that illustrate the idea of civil disobedience as instigating social change. The first one is the case of the Madres in Argentina. So while the Dirty War raged in Argentina from 1976 to 1983, anyone who was not seen aligning with military government was taken, tortured, and killed. The people that were taken were often referred to as the disappeared, as the government proceeded to destroy any documents that would allow families to reclaim the body of their family members. But in 1977, under the weight of huge personal sacrifice, a group of mothers met on the Thursdays in the large Plaza de Mayo in Buenos Aires. This is the exact site of the Argentinian government. They were speaking out against the regime that had taken so much from them. Each week they continued to protest by nonviolent means. They were harassed and tortured, but they could not be ignored. Women in world history writes, as the mothers, they presented a powerful moral symbol which over time transformed them from women seeking to protect their children to women wishing to transform the state so that it reflected maternal values. They created a space where the government could no longer ignore or give excuses for the dirty war officials. They were eventually joined by human rights groups from other countries, and the newly named Madres organization created similar protests in neighboring countries. The second example is the civil rights movement. One cannot talk about civil disobedience without referencing civil rights, a movement to end the subjugation of one group of people under another simply because of differing colors of skin. The birth of the famous words, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Where women like Rosa Parks claimed her right and fair place on the bus, despite the fact the law was against her, leading to the Montgomery bus boycott. Where Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as the primary leader and led campaigns, rallies, protests, and meetings all across the United States. Where a planned march from Selma to Montgomery ended in tear gas, blood, and torture. All these things symbolize the act of sacrifice, a greater calling, and an effort to create change against injustice.